Olá, olá, bem-vindos ao último dia, ao quinto dia da Awake Strategy Week. Estou muito feliz de estar aqui, conectando mundos, né? Do mundo de impacto nos negócios, mais propósito. E me dá um oi aí no chat e me fala o seu nome, de onde você está falando. Que nem eu falei nos outros dias, né? Eu não quero que seja só uma conversa, eu aqui falando, ou os nossos convidados aqui falando. Quero que seja uma troca também, tá bom? Então, enquanto a gente vai esperando a galera chegar, vai colocando aí no chat de onde você está falando e o que você tem buscado também, né? A sua intenção para o dia de hoje. E também compartilha esse vídeo. Se você clicar no vídeo, tem uma setinha curvadinha que você pode compartilhar esse vídeo com pelo menos 3 amigos que você acredita que esse conhecimento de hoje, esse tema de hoje, de negócios transformadores, impacto social, inovação social, que vai ser significativa para esses seus amigos. Bom, e antes de introduzir a nossa convidada de hoje, eu vou me apresentar. Deixa eu ver aqui o chat. Oi, Grace, de Resende, Rio de Janeiro. Arthur, bem-vindos. Bom, eu sou a Caroline Shalitari, falando aqui diretamente do Vale do Silício, por isso que tá dia aqui. Eu sou mentora de liderança e carreira na Awake Strategy, mas nem sempre foi assim, né? Eu cumpri um sonho de me tornar militar. Me formei na Escola de Formação de Oficiais da Marinha Mercante. Sou pilota de navio por formação. Então, viajei, fiquei aí 367 dias embarcada no Oceano Atlântico, trabalhando com plataforma de petróleo. E me bateu Tava tudo bem, né? Eu tava me divertindo a bordo, adoro desafios, né? Então, a bordo, cada dia é um desafio diferente, né? Então, eu sempre gostei muito de estar a bordo, na verdade. Porém, vinha uma sensação do tipo, caramba, cadê aquela Caroline que queria apoiar a humanidade de alguma forma? E como pilota de navio, eu não ia conseguir aquilo, eu não ia conseguir desenvolver uma nova tecnologia, desenvolver uma nova solução para apoiar as pessoas, eu não ia conseguir aquilo, né? Esse foi o meu primeiro chamado, assim, né? Nossa, o que eu tô fazendo aqui? Porque a minha criança interna tava me chamando, me falando para eu fazer outra coisa. E foi aí que eu decidi largar a Marinha Mercante, né? Foi um processo e tive coaches para me apoiar, coaches de carreira. E nesse processo, né, que aí a gente junto descobriu que eu tinha mesmo que trabalhar na área de criatividade e inovação. E me formei coach. Foi assim, amor à primeira vista, quando eu me formei e quando eu comecei a trabalhar com pessoas, porque é um processo que a gente não tem preço ver o olho da pessoa brilhar diferente quando o cliente, né, o coach, encontra realmente qual é o propósito dele, qual é a missão dele. Porque você vibra diferente, você brilha diferente, a tua energia muda, né? Então, vem mais foco, determinação. Então, ver essa transição das pessoas realmente foi assim, nossa, é isso que eu quero fazer pro resto da minha vida. E, como eu falei, eu sou formada como coach de missão de vida e negócios nos Andes chilenos, na Condor Blanco Internacional. E também aqui no Vale do Silício, um mix aí de espiritualidade e inovação. Eu atuei como coach e consultora de negócios para a ONU, trabalhando diretamente com empreendedores sociais na África. Trabalhei em incubadora de startups de impacto social aqui no Vale também, buscando soluções de negócios para problemas sociais reais aqui. E também trabalhei para uma startup de tecnologia, uma Microsoft Partner, resolvendo problemas de gestão de tecnologia e de pessoas, desde pequenas startups até gigantes corporações. E hoje, mestre em Negócios Internacionais e Inovação Disruptiva pela Hult International Business School. Eu tenho trabalhado nos prédios do Google através da Veiko, em Palo Alto, né? E também me dedicado à Awake Strategy, Coaching and Consulting, que está lançando a primeira nascente do mundo, que é o primeiro passo para um empreendedor dar antes de ir para uma incubadora ou aceleradora de startups, que é uma pré-incubadora de fundadores, cuja missão é formar líderes de grande potencial para criarem um genuíno impacto positivo através dos negócios. E está sendo um prazer compartilhar com vocês as figuras ilustres que eu conheci aqui na minha jornada e os conhecimentos, né, adquiridos aqui nessa jornada no Vale do Silício. E essa semana foi um bombardeio de conhecimento, recebi bastante feedback aí no nosso grupo do WhatsApp. A gente tem um grupo do WhatsApp para a Awake Strategy Week. E se você quiser, eu vou colocar o link aqui daqui a pouquinho. E se a sua cabeça tá borbulhando de ideia e você ainda não sabe o que ou como criar um projeto que vale a pena realmente focar pelo menos seus próximos 5 anos de vida, você vai querer aproveitar a oferta Awake Strategy Week da Nascente. O que é uma nascente? Uma nascente é o primeiro passo, né, que eu falei, antes de qualquer empreendedor ou intraempreendedor antes de pensar em ir para uma incubadora aceleradora. Então é nascente, incubadora, aceleradora. Uma nascente é onde aspirantes a empreendedores sociais se juntam para se tornarem fundadores eficientes e aumentarem as chances do seu projeto ser um sucesso, tendo em mente aí as principais razões pelas quais as startups falham, né, que a gente vai falar daqui a pouco sobre isso. E também é o lugar para buscarem cofundadores que estejam alinhados ao seu propósito, né? Porque lá você vai descobrir o seu propósito e você vai encontrar pessoas que também descobriram o propósito delas. Então não são pessoas perdidas, né? Elas vão querer, elas vão estar comprometidas com aquela missão. E imagina você encontrar pessoas que estão realmente comprometidas. Esse é o maior desafio que a gente tem como fundadores, né? Encontrar pessoas que estão realmente comprometidas por elas mesmas, por um negócio, por uma transformação, né? E então, confere aqui o programa com detalhes. Vou colocar o link aqui. Com detalhes e adquira já a sua vaga com a oferta que acaba hoje à meia-noite, né? Que é quando acaba a Awake Strategy Week, tá bom? Clica aí, confere, estão todos os detalhes ali. E o nosso programa, ele tem vagas limitadas. Então, só os primeiros que se inscreverem terão acesso a todo o passo a passo para descobrir o seu propósito, montar a sua carreira dos sonhos e impactar o mundo positivamente através de um negócio transformador. E, falando em negócio transformador, nós temos hoje uma convidada que nada mais, nada menos é Joanne Lawrence. Ela leciona negócios e Sociedade Global e Inovação Social nos programas de MBA e MBA Executivo na Hult, São Francisco, Xangai, Dubai, Londres e Boston, todos os hubs de inovação. Ela é parceira acadêmica da UNDP, que é um programa de desenvolvimento da ONU, e curadora do Case Century, e atuou como co-conselheira acadêmica do Global Compact da ONU, que também é um programa de desenvolvimento da ONU. Seus projetos atuais enfocam o poder transformador dos negócios e a interseção de seus aspectos sociais, econômicos e ambientais, incluindo mulheres e questões de diversidade. Ela foi consultora e professora adjunta de Estratégia e Gestão da INSEAD, na França, e afiliada do Business and Society Center. Com mais de 35 anos de extensa experiência internacional em corporações, empresas de consultoria e organizações sem fins lucrativos, ela trabalhou com organizações globais como BP, IBM e o Banco Mundial, bem como empresas menores e com maior foco social, chegando a receber vários prêmios, inclusive foi nomeada uma das 20 mulheres corporativas da Grã-Bretanha pelo Sunday Times de Londres. Como vice-presidente da empresa de saúde britânica, empresa de saúde britânica, ela liderou uma iniciativa de mudança organizacional global inovadora que se tornou o assunto de um livro e de um estudo de caso premiado do INSEAD. Mais tarde, ela fundou sua própria consultoria com sede em Londres, que se concentrava na mudança de cultura organizacional. Seus livros incluem Liderança Globalmente Responsável, gerenciando de acordo com os princípios do Pacto Global da ONU, Da Promessa ao Desempenho, a Jornada de Transformação, na Smith Klein Beckham, que é esse aqui, e seu da Harvard Business School Press, de 97, seu estudo de caso, Sustentabilidade como Oportunidade, Plano de Vida Sustentável da Unilever, publicada pela Hult Publishing, em 2015, ganhou o prestigioso prêmio Case Center de melhor caso em ética e sustentabilidade em 2018. Foi um caso de best-seller nessa categoria por 3 anos consecutivos. As suas publicações mais recentes abordam o papel do capitalismo, liderando em um novo mundo, e a próxima geração de líderes globais, mulheres e liderança. Uau! Que currículo, gente! E, além disso, né, ela é vocês vão ver, ela é uma querida, né, ela realmente tem o propósito dela definido, ela realmente está alinhada com o impacto, né, com realmente apoiar as pessoas, e isso se reflete em todas as ações que ela tem nos negócios. Então, para mim, ela é uma inspiração e eu espero que ela inspire vocês também. Bom, vou chamar ela aqui. 1 minutinho e já voltamos. Hello, Joanne. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, hi. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Oh, I see you look amazing. um, Joanne, I just introduced you. But I want to hear from you. Like, tell us who you are without diploma, organization. Who is Joanne? And also tell us what motivates you to do what you do.
All right. So my name is Joanne Lawrence. I am a faculty member at Hult International Business School, which is where I met Caroline in one of my classes. And my background, I have, more than 3 decades worth of experience in corporate, academia, consulting, and not-for-profit. The red thread through all I've ever done, or what in terms of what motivates me, I guess has always been this desire to really leave things better from my having been there. So truly about how do we bring about positive change? And that has connected me throughout my whole career. So if I think about it, when I first got out of school, I can remember thinking about the major sectors you could go into, which was, for me, business, academia, or government. All were important. But again, if I go back to this vision of wanting to make change, I think for me at that time, I really believed that business had the ability to truly change lives. And that has not changed. If anything, it has grown more focused, and I am ever more convinced that that's true. That eventually, of course, leads me into academia, which I also believe can change lives. For me, I wanted to have the experience first that I then bring into the classroom. So that's kind of how my trajectory has worked. And the other piece of my own life journey, I guess, is I've always believed in globalization, being a global person. When I was 15, I said I wanted to be a world person. So those two things have driven me, being global and looking at the world in its entirety, and this desire to really make things better because I was there.
Uh-huh.
And that's not changed. That's really still the same.
That's great. So it was always like that since you were a kid, or there was something that happened that made you
No,
like
I find the thing about being international, especially as an American, because not many people really from, when I was growing up would think that way. I always laugh. I say to people, some of it could be learning about the missionaries who went to all these wonderful places.
Mhm.
I had a great imagination, so I think I was always loved to read. So I think all those idea of being a global person, UNICEF, all those organizations that were reaching out to help people around the world were always part of my psyche. So that's why I say, and even now working or trying to work with the UN and the UN Global Compact, partnering with UNDP in my class on social innovation, which is where I met Caroline, and some of those international organizations are very key. And in fact, I lived in London. I worked for very global companies, my last one being with a pharmaceutical company in London. So again, I would say that desire to be a world person, as I said, goes back to about 15. That desire to make things better, that is just part of my value system. And so it's hard to say when did that happen, because I would say even as a child, I ran for class president, I did all those things. And I think it's really because I could see places where things could be improved, and I wanted to be part of the group that improved it.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Um, yeah, as you said, like business can help us to build a better society, but why do you think that capitalism, how we see it right now, it's under attack, or it's over, or should be over, or what's going on in your perspective?
I think what's interesting about capitalism, I mean, it's an economic system that quite honestly has worked better than any of the others. I mean, if we look at all the things we enjoy today that have improved all our lives, capitalism was the economic system that did that. It gave incentives to people through private ownership, through private initiative to actually succeed. I think, and I always say this, I don't think it's necessarily capitalism. I think what we're seeing today is how we're implementing capitalism. I think that that's been really what the issue is. I think it's, when we look at, and I always ask my students this, what's the purpose of business? It often comes back that it's about making money. Well, when you look at it's about making money, and then I ask the next question, well, how do you do that? Almost always the students will say, well, you cut costs, of course. And how do you cut costs? So let's take this down. You cut costs, in many cases, it's by paying the least amount of wages, by using materials that are the least expensive. So in a way, that mentality, and that's what I mean about how you implement it, it's really exploiting human and material resources. And that's really not, that focus, and I think that has, it's always been true of business, but I think perhaps not to the extent today. And I think the result of all of that has been, quite honestly, this incredible income inequality gap, which I don't think people really understand what that means and the impact on it on all of us. If you look at the chaos we're experiencing today, revolutions are fought over income inequality. That's kind of what you see. When you have enormous, enormous wealth, think about what some people are worth today, and then look at the others that are living below $2 a day. It's huge. And so the point is, it's created a restlessness, a backlash, if you will, against capitalism, blaming capitalism as opposed to how we're implementing it. And I think if you think about the instability that we're experiencing right now, businesses can't thrive where there's such instability. So at the end of the day, we are all in this together. And I think the sooner we recognize that, and indeed the World Economic Forum has actually said income inequality is the greatest threat the world faces because it's leaving too many people out.
Yeah. And I remember as yesterday, your class, you asking about, what is the purpose of business? And it was a good discussion. And yeah, so in your opinion, what is the purpose of business?
I actually think it's quite interesting. I don't think the purpose of business has actually ever changed. Mm-hmm. I think if you look at the past, business has always been about visionaries trying to solve social problems. That's really what it is. I don't think people that start businesses, like if you look at a Steve Jobs, even in Apple, I don't think they start businesses with the idea, I'm going to make a lot of money, right? I think they have an idea that they would like to implement, okay? And through that, they may make money. But I don't think the drive is always about making money. If you talk to any entrepreneurs today, it was often about solving a problem. I've just been watching a PBS program that is fascinating about the founding of international air travel. It is the story of the man that founded Pan Am, which was the first truly global airline. And this goes back to the 1920s. It's so inspiring because he had a vision about what what air travel could do for the world. Nobody would listen to him. So if you think of any of these ideas, most of the businesses we look at today were created by visionaries. I can still remember there was a famous quote by the CEO of IBM at the time that Apple was created, where he said he didn't think anybody would want a computer in their home. Yeah. Think about it. Today, this is what we're looking at. This is a computer.
Exactly.
Right? So it was about, he was used to seeing the big computers and how would anybody want that? Why would they want it? So I think business has always been about visionaries trying to solve social problems. And that went with, Unilever and Lifebuoy trying to solve cholera, whether you create refrigerators because food spoils and now it can travel more distances. These were all social issues. Yeah. Even the washing machine things like that in those days when women did most of the washing, that freed them to do a lot of other things, right? So all these initiatives have helped to improve our standard of living. And so again, if you rethink this, I think it's more like business has to think about being more transformative than transactional, right?
Mm-hmm.
You need to think about, let's look at the world, right? We are at, like, say, roughly 7 billion people. Now, if we look at, we're going to 9 billion people by 2030, how many people do you think business actually addresses today? When we talk about the top and bottom of the pyramid, business tends to target the top billion. So we're all getting, no, we don't live like this. If you look at Hernando de Soto from Peru, the economist, the famed economist, he will say that most people live poorly, right? That top billion, we are the exception. So how do we bring, and yet, if you also look at the demographics, those are the very countries where our potential workers are going to come from, where our potential consumers are going to come from. How do we make them employees, and how do we create consumers? Business needs them, right? So, and I think we need to rethink it.
Yeah, and what brings me to another point. Why do you think is inequality such a big economic problem, even for the rich people individually? Why should everyone care about it, even though they are not directly affected by that?
I would argue we're all affected by that, because I think income inequality, when people are poor, they're desperate, right? So think about it. Why do people live in walled communities, right? Because they're afraid, right? They're afraid their security is threatened, because desperate people do desperate things. So I think that we might want to think it's them and us, and we don't have to worry about it, but we're worrying about it every day. You have to worry about instability, whether it's, security systems, whether they tax the healthcare system because they don't have the money, so that's your taxes going to help pay for that. So it's really very unenlightened to think that poverty doesn't affect all of us. And as I said, poverty drives revolution. So if you look back at history, people that are, look at the riots, look at the protests, right? These are, some is on racial issues, other is also out of sheer frustration, right? So I don't think we can, income inequality is everybody's problem. And quite honestly, I think going forward, it's going to be even more a problem for business, because think about it, if business relies on consumers buying their products and services, if there are no consumers, or if the developing markets, so now let's think about this. If you think about the developed world is getting older people don't buy a lot of stuff. Young people buy stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Because they're building households, they're having children. If you look at where the demographics are, the growth in population is all going to be happening in the developing world, right? So now let's think about it. That's also where most of the poor people are. If we do not help those countries to develop, we're going to create greater instability. If there is all this instability, there are no markets for business. How can you sell into countries that have no income because the people have no jobs or have no education? So therefore you have no consumers. More importantly, you have no workers. So I think not looking at developing countries as part of business's remit is very short-sighted. It's very short-sighted. So I think creating more inclusive economies, closing that gap, bringing more people in, I really do believe that we all prosper.
Mm-hmm. And how can corporations, business address it?
I think what was very interesting is back in 2015, the UN launched something called the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah.
And at the time, they were building on something they had done in the year 2000, which was creating 8 goals for business, as well as the UN Global Compact, which was 10 principles for how you should leaders should behave. And, they included things like corruption and the environment and human rights. But the 17 development goals that the UN launched in 2015 tried to tackle all the issues that are affecting the developing world. So they were in fact trying to eliminate poverty. That is one of their main remits, is to ensure prosperity for more people. These 17 goals, what's interesting about them, and I do use them as a foundation in my classes, what's interesting to me is they provide huge opportunities for business. Huge opportunities for business. So if you think about it, these 17 development goals look at things like education, healthcare, climate change, energy, sustainable consumption, these areas, maternal health. These are all areas that, if we really think about it, they can offer businesses huge opportunities that are aligned with their strategic goals, right? So if you are, for example, in the medical device field, and this has happened clearly with major corporations, say like a GE, trying to address healthcare in developing markets, well, they end up developing medical devices that are a lot less expensive and simpler, clearly simpler, because they have to deal with these hostile environments, but effective. So they're bringing healthcare to more people than would have had access to it before. And by the way, it's also developing a new product line for the company. So that's a win-win. It serves it helps solve the issue of developing countries. At the same time, it's creating a new business line for the company. So I think it's very exciting right now because we're seeing a lot of these new models develop. One where you've got the multinationals looking at these areas as potential markets. So kind of social entrepreneurship, setting up entrepreneurial initiatives, but within the company to develop some of these new products and services. You have a lot more public-private partnerships. So where companies, say like IKEA, are partnering with Save the Children to help get rid of things like child labor. But at the same time, how do we educate those children so they become the future workers of tomorrow that IKEA might end up hiring? And then you have these third sort of model, which is entrepreneurs that are focused on solving social issues. So very much like our social innovation class, where we partnered with UNDP. And we had these entrepreneurs in developing countries where you all worked with them as business students to help develop some of their ideas. And again, that can be around access to water, access to education, access to simple things like waste collection. So I think that's where the opportunity and why this is so exciting, because if you are now looking at the 17 development goals and looking at 7 billion people that have been left out, or 7.5 billion people that have been left out of the economic system, bringing those together can really help move the world forward.
Yeah, you mentioned the partnership that we did with UNDP, and it was such a great experience working directly with social entrepreneurs from Middle East, and really understand that they as human beings, I could feel that they have the same issues that we all have, like resilience. Oh, I want to create a business. I want to solve this problem. And, I could feel that, oh my God, we are all human beings trying to solve this problem and we need help somehow. And wow, it was a very great experience.
Because I think with all these people, I think it's always amazing when you see these horrible pictures of things happening around the world. We all want the same things. We all want better lives for our children. We all want to be happy. I mean, those are human values that we all share. I think too often we've separated, well, this is business, this is society. Not true. Business needs society and society needs business, right? They both work together. And in fact, a few years ago, McKinsey's, two authors at McKinsey's research group I think they had a great quote, and I want to make sure I get it exactly right. But one of the things that they said was that it's not really about the idea that it's not just about generating profits. For them, it was the genius of capitalism is that it creates incentives for solving human problems, and then makes those solutions widely available, right? They scale them. That's the value of business. It's not just happening in a garage somewhere. They're able to scale it. And it's really the solution to human problems that defines prosperity. It's not about how much money. That's why GDP is not a very good measure of a country's health. It really isn't. I mean, if you said to me, and it's more about this idea of access to healthcare, education, that would be more definitive. That would be a better way of looking at it. And you might remember this is a question I also often ask students. If you had $1 million and you were on an island, are you rich? Rich, prosperity is about how you're living. If you have all that money, but you can't buy anything, right? Or you're exposed to health, it doesn't mean anything. So money as a goal it just doesn't work, because that's not what it is. And as you've heard so many people say, the amount you have really doesn't matter, because after you get over a certain threshold, it's meaningless, right? It's amassing wealth for the sake of amassing wealth, not because you actually improve the way you live.
Yeah, you just made me remember of that, like, money is an intermediary, right? To do something. We accumulate this coin that we can just exchange for things that we actually need and want. And often, or sometimes, I just think about how would the world be without money. And if we don't need the money, if we don't need to have this type of transaction, if we could honestly, do transactions without this intermediary, because the future of business is to quit intermediaries. We see Airbnb, Uber, and everything. So I just, just a thought, maybe a utopia, but it's always in my mind. As when you were a kid and you had this idea of like, oh, I want to be a global citizen. For me, it's like that. Also, I want to be I really resonate with everything that you said in the beginning. And also, I often imagine how would the world be without this intermediary that someone created. It's an invention, right? The money itself, the currency, it's an invention that someone created to make this transaction in a structured way, because we can't look inside of ourselves individually and really be fair in a transaction. So we needed a lot of structures to do transactions. So I'm thinking about it, how it would be.
Well, no, I think it's an interesting question. I mean, the creation of money or coins was really to enable the exchange of goods, to make it a lot easier. Because if you think about, the original system was barter. You have this, I have that, so let's exchange. Money made it a lot simpler. And certainly as you went global, and you had people in England getting cloth from Portugal, or wine, or, when things were going back and forth, it just made it a lot easier to put a value on that. I think where it's gotten out of hand is that's become the value. That's become how we define ourselves, is how much we've accumulated, rather than are we living any better. And so that's where I think it's gotten a little bit disjointed. I mean, I remember when I first started working, a CEO would maybe make 16 times what the average employee made. 16. Today it can be 300 times.
Oh, wow.
And you look, the numbers are enormous. And then the argument was, well, taxes, and this is, I think, why Milton Friedman, there in the 1960s said, well, it's all about making money. But he also assumed taxes help to redistribute wealth. So if you're very wealthy, then presumably you're paying more tax. If you're a company, you're paying taxes to help pay for the roads and all these things. But the reality is that's not what happens. Because if you think about it, everybody's always trying to not pay their taxes. So in a way, it's a defeating system, and the wealthier you are, it seems there's more opportunities to avoid paying taxes.
Wow.
So the system, it's ideal. It was designed to be as an ideal, but the implementation of it has left a lot of to be desired. And I think that's where we get this gap, and that's where people get angry, right? So if you're not, healthcare is probably mostly for the US, not other places. But if we look at any of these things, access to education. If you're very poor, for example, or you're a girl, you might be born with no birth certificate. If you have no birth certificate, you can't access healthcare, you can't access education. So the system keeps repeating itself to the point where young girl, and that's why you see so much focus today on young girl education, because they're never going to break that cycle if there's not a concerted effort made to stop that, to make sure people in favelas or in areas that don't own property. So Hernando de Soto's point is that we need people to have access to property and own property, because that's how you generate more money. You can't get a loan if you don't own anything, right? So you can't increase your business. So these are all wrapped up into a systemic structure that really needs to be thought through.
And which practices would you recommend to corporations to be part of this movement? How does this business model look like?
Well, I think for a long time, and actually it came from my own corporate experience. When I was very young and I first started to work in the corporation, I don't know why, but I realized very early on that the key was thinking beyond the investor. That the key really, in my case, because of where my career started, which was in employee communications, I really saw the employees as key. And then suppliers is key. So very early in my career, I would say I was still in my early 20s, this idea of the multiple stakeholder model was to me very important. And it made a lot of sense, right? Because if you treated employees well, they were going to treat the customer well. And if you treat the customer well, it improves revenues. So for me, stakeholder theory versus shareholder theory is key. I think when we got so focused on shareholder value, I would argue I don't think we should even teach it anymore, because I think it's so focused on one stakeholder, and that can often be at the detriment of the others. So let's pay workers as little as possible. Let's have a very lean workforce. Not that some of these are bad things, don't get me wrong. We should always be looking at all that to make sure we're not being wasteful. But I think when it gets to the point of we're exploiting people, that demoralizes people, that decreases productivity. And today with the internet and all these stories getting headlines around the world, it's even worse. A factory that collapses in Bangladesh that is making clothes that is for H&M or Zara or any of these other companies, because nobody asked, does that factory have the license to have that many people? That's really a disgrace, right? It's easy to just ask and then say, by the way, let's leverage our ability to say to that factory owner, you know what? You have to put in certain standards to protect these workers if you want our contract. So a company can leverage their bigness to help bring about change. That's what I mean about transformative, right? There's a transformative power. So I think stakeholder theory is important. I think holistic thinking, systems thinking. So think about how everything you do has an impact on everything else, to recognize that everything is interdependent, more so than ever before. And again, I give that example of things like, you come out with the little pod for coffee, right? That seems like such a great idea. Fresh coffee every time, looks great, right? Well, did anybody ask, what do we do with the pods once the coffee's done? Right? So that's thinking the big picture. Even
Yeah.
things like Tom's shoes, they had an issue, because great, give away a pair of shoes. But what about the poor shoemakers locally? Because we're giving away cheaper shoes. We're not. So today, Tom's is looking at, how do we use local people to make the shoes that we're giving away? Okay. So think about the whole system. So I think systems thinking is very key. And I think the third, really third and fourth. Third is collaboration. How do we learn to be better partners, especially with these groups that are not in the same business that we're in? How do we collaborate better with NGOs, with governments to create, again, a better system? And I think the last, which is I think is probably the most important, I think is how do we build trust? And that I think is about being transparent, about communicating frequently in ways that are honest, because underlying the entire system is trust in business. We trust our employers to pay us for our work. The customer trusts us that, the goods they buy are going to deliver what's promised. Investors trust that the financial information we're giving them is accurate. So that's what I find very disturbing today, that the trust in all our major institutions is being undermined right now. And without trust, it won't work. It cannot work because you're not going to take the chance.
Yeah, you said so many things that we do in AWAKE strategy, in this new concept that I'm introducing right now, like the nascent. You mentioned like, oh, we have to treat in a good way our employees. Also, the employees will treat well our clients, and I wonder, where does this genuine care come from? And again, it comes from you understanding yourself, understanding what is the public that you want to serve as a human being, understanding your mission in life. So it's exactly what we do in the nascent. Because if you create a company and you don't care about the employees, as you said about H&M and Zara, they are just hiring anyone to do their clothes, like sell, as you said, like it's a transaction business, it's not a transformative business. And to create the transformative business, we have to understand first, in my opinion, like who we are, who we want to help in the world, and how we are going to do it, to really care about the clients and employees. Because I see the employees that we bring to our company as our second family, the tribe that we want to create, how they look like, and what are their values, what they want to do during the weekend, who they are, So yeah, we touch in everything during the program. And tell me a little bit more, what does being a transformative business imply?
I think for me, it's very key that a transformative business looks at things holistically versus when I said transactional. So you don't look at the employee as a means to an end. You look at investing in that employee, because at the end they're gonna help create the business. So they will help. You're helping to transform them. You're developing them, right, to be better employees, to have more skills. And if we think about, even if I give that example of the Bangladesh, if those people think about the fact that they're workers, they are performing a service for a company, they are getting wages, if they're treated safely, so a building is safe, they prosper, so now they're earning more money, right? So as they earn more money, they're able to send, say, their children to school, so that transforms the next generation, right? Because now they can afford to send the children to school. They're able to buy things that help them, say, with their health, a bar of soap, not expensive, but as we've seen with COVID, and it was true in cholera, just hand washing with soap can save so many children's lives, right? Children die under the age of 5 every single day, thousands, because of the fact that they transmit some of these diseases that could be prevented with just soap. So that's what I mean about business being transformative. Examples where, like if I think about a Unilever, the business is trying to build in these rural markets. Well, if we're trying to build in a rural market, one of the things you could look at is how do we distribute in those markets? So what they've done is they've said, you know what, if we're in rural India, one of the key influencers in rural India are the women. So they have looked at the women and said, right, we will train them to be entrepreneurs. So those women are distributing goods, and they've committed to thousands. I mean, we're talking probably 50, 60,000 women in rural India have become distributors for Unilever, who have trained them to become entrepreneurs. The money that they earn, they send the children to school, they buy better food, so now they're healthier, right? And now, by the way, they have some extra funds so they can actually buy some of these things. So that's what I mean about being transformative. That's one company dealing with, maybe think about the billions that if all the companies did that, right? And I have an example of Natura, which I think might be of interest. Natura has been exemplary and a leader in this space for a long time. And just to share with you one of the quotes, okay? So, well, first of all, what the CEO does is all the employees are asked to think about the impact of their decisions. So every decision they make, this is holistic thinking, what's the impact of that decision on the economics of the company, on society, and on the environment? So right there, he's asking people to look at what's the whole picture. He's created stakeholder engagement processes. So for example, he engaged specialists to talk about palm oil, which of course is a big issue with the Amazon, right? So he brought together experts on biodiversity to think through with the company, what do we do about palm oil, okay? And then they've also created this thing called Natura Connecta, which is really about bringing together the public to talk about what could Natura be doing better, right? What are the things you would like to be looking at the company and its role within society? And this is a quote from him, which I really enjoy using because I think it says it. He says, when a company recognizes that its ultimate license to operate comes from civil society. So without society, you don't operate, right? Because you'll go out of business. It ensures that we want to stay in touch with society's expectations and how they change over time. This is a key aspect of managing risk. If at any point consumers learn that a company or brand can't be trusted, those brands suffer enormous damage. And I would add, it's very hard to recoup from that. Very hard to, history's littered. Look at Volkswagen, look at Wells Fargo, look at Siemens and Volkswagen. These are companies that are going to take a long time to recover from their betrayal of society's trust.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned Natura because this year they did something that really called attention in Brazil. They, for Father's Day campaign, they hired a celebrity who was a transgender father to be in the campaign. Yeah, so it created a lot of buzz in Brazil, but it's also, as you said, the transformative business, they are looking at everything in a very holistic way. They're looking to society, not to clients, and focus on the money, but which transformation they can do in society. And they are touching in many areas of society. You mentioned like many other areas, and now they're touching in the equality and
Caroline, I think it's very interesting, given what you mentioned about the nascent part of developing a business. I've often, and just share this with you and the listeners, I've often had students say to me, oh, that's great for big companies, that they can do that. And I would argue it's actually easier for a little company because you can start that way. And there's lots of companies that have started that way. Patagonia which is world famous for what they do for the environment, they began that way. Tom's of Maine, another consumer product that has natural toothpaste and oral care products, they started that way, right? So seventh generation, timber, there's so many companies that it is core to who they are. So I think it's a lot easier to start that way and grow it that way, because the hardest thing to do is to undo what's already been done, right? You need to have a very courageous leader. And we have them, thank goodness. I would put people like Paul Pullman from Unilever, who's just recently stepped down as CEO. We have Nestle's CEO. We have a lot of big companies, BP, who have CEOs that are taking a risk. I mean, they're taking chances on a lot of this. And I think quite successfully, because if I look at Unilever, something like 57% of their revenues come from these developing markets. That compares to other companies where maybe only 17% come from developing markets. So, I mean, this was a McKinsey statistic from several years ago, but I have no doubt it hasn't changed very much, because I think it takes will, and I think it takes these skills that we were talking about to really be able to go into those markets and bring people in. And I think an inclusive economy is really going to be the key to capitalism's ongoing success.
Yeah, yeah, and you talked about like to be true to your core values, and that's what we called the early adopters, right? The crazy people that are really passionate about that specific thing. They became fans, you know. So if you can captivate that little group and learn from them, you can scale. So yeah, I totally agree with what you said.
I always think a great example too of an entrepreneur that thought holistically was Henry Ford. When Henry Ford created the Model T automobile, his idea was to, how do we bring automobiles to the masses? Until then, there was only the very wealthy that could afford it. So, you know, everybody always hears a story about the Model T. It was very simple. It was black. But what people don't realize is how that changed all our lives, right? Because in the end, what he did was he used the assembly line, which then went on for everybody, right? For all sorts of businesses. But that assembly line enabled him to make the product cheaper, right? So he was able to create these automobiles faster and cheaper. It built the suburbs. Until then, people couldn't live far from where they worked because it would take too long.
Right.
So that created a whole suburban system, a highway system eventually, so that people could go into the city to work, but their families could enjoy less polluted, you know, more idyllic locations. He also raised the salary of his employees so that they could buy the car. So, I mean, Henry Ford, and the company is still around today. So let's think about, if you want to think about longevity, and does this work, I think Ford is a great example of how over time that strategy has worked. I mean, it still exists, and you know, the Model T goes back to like the early 1900s. So so I just think we need to change the way we think about business. And again, he used it to solve a problem like, why should cars just be for the rich? Why can't every man have a car? And then he developed a way to do that. It's pretty inspiring.
It is. We have a question from the audience. The NGO Associação Vida Abundante asked, how can an NGO in the countryside of Brazil have access to the UN and have a program with them, and how could they leverage the most of this partnership?
So the UN is a huge
place.
It's a huge, huge place. And in fact, when I partnership with UNDP, it's with UNDP in the Middle East because of a colleague that I know. And I've worked with her now for about a decade. But I do think what I would definitely recommend is going into the UN website, look up UNDP or the specific area that your NGO is in. As I said, UNICEF is for children. UNDP is about development work in various countries. There is a UN empowerment group for women. You need to go to the whole website and you'll see all the agencies that are part of it. And then I would access their websites, because not only do they, put news and instruments out there, but they also publish a lot of very helpful publications. So if I just look at what I deal with the UN Global Compact, because the UN Global Compact is it's the only group within the UN that deals specifically with businesses. If you go into the UN Global Compact website, there is all sorts of information. They have reports on human rights and how you introduce human rights into your company, okay? What are some of the ways to get training in human rights, right? So, and the same with the environmental, the UN, the climate program that they have. There's all sorts of resources on there that they deliberately do to encourage, to spread their ripples, as I call it, right? To create a ripple among all of you out there by using their resources. So they don't, again, the UN is a government agency. So it is governments that are part of it. So, 194 countries are members of the UN. It's not necessarily, they have individual departments and agencies. And I would say, depending upon what that NGO's background is, they should look specifically within the agencies that would be relevant. Again, whether it's education, development, health.
Mm-hmm. And how can we bring this UNDP program that you said to universities in Brazil? Is there any ways, or as you said before too, business is about trust, or it's just some partnership that you developed through these 10 years, or is there a program that we could replicate in universities? They're also
it is just something, as I said, I've developed, but it's interesting you raise that, because I was thinking this could be something that we should look at more universities, and I'm very happy if you want to put my email up there for other schools to contact me, because at one point it could be there's UNDP in Latin America that might be able to partner with some of the schools, and I can share how I've done it. So no, as I said, in trying to be transformative, the goal is also to bring more people in, and then I think of it like skipping stones. The more stones you throw out there, the more ripples you create, and so that would be my own personal goal.
Great. So a final question.
Yes.
If 7.8 billion people could listen to, everyone could listen to you right now, which message would you deliver to them?
I guess especially in this background of what we're dealing with right now, which I do think will make us all more resilient, by the way. I'm an optimist. I wouldn't be in this space if I wasn't an optimist. I should start with that. I think my biggest wish for all would that we recognize truly how interdependent we are, that we don't operate as an island, that we really we fall or rise based on our interconnections, and that we are all enriched and better off because of those interconnections. I don't think globalization is dead. I think it's the key. I think we're all better off. Again, all the goods we've had access to, the standard of living for that even billion of the 7.8 billion, I think we need to recognize the interconnectedness so we could bring the other 6 billion up with us. And I do really believe that's possible, because I think the millennials, the Gen Z, I think that this next generation of leaders, I think you get it. I really do think you get it. And so I'm very encouraged. So I would really say to everybody, don't lose hope. I think we should aspire to greater things. I really believe that. I think we should all aspire to the fact that we have unique contributions to make. that for many of us, business is maybe the way we're choosing to do that. But I always get discouraged when I see people wanting to leave business because they feel it has no heart, it has no soul. I disagree with that. I really think good businesses can have enormous impact and can make the world a better place, which is why I'm still in it. I'm still in this whole idea of business is transformative. I've never lost that goal.
I like it. Really resonates with me. That's why I'm launching all this new concept, because I just noticed it through data, like why startups fail and everything. People are so like anxious to create a new business, create a new invention, but wait a minute, let's step back a little bit and really understand what we want to do. Because I suffered a lot years ago when I was trying to decide my career after I live in the merchant marine, because I'm a ship's pilot. And so when I left the merchant marine, I was like, oh my God, what should I do? And I have so many opportunities. I want to be like PhD in quantum physics, astronaut or architect, dancer, model. I was all over the place. And that's a caricature of, yes, we have so many possibilities, but what do you know? So, and it reflects in our actions and the business that we create and the relationships that we create as well, inside business, outside business. And
and I would also say it's an acknowledgement also of what your true competencies and skills are. Like, it's an honest look at, okay, this is what I'm very good at. This is what I can scale, right? Like if you're a connector, Caroline, or you can scale this, or right, if you can help people develop their aspirations. As I said, I watched you with our entrepreneur in our social innovation class, and it was amazing to watch you, and also to watch how he received what you had to say. And so I think he was very grateful, and as I said, it was a class, but the way you approached it, I think, reflects a skill that you're very good at. So I think we all have to be honest with ourselves. I think I know everybody talks about, well, understand what you don't do well and work on that. I would sometimes say, you know what, develop what you're very good at, and make that your expertise. I used to say 5 E's to success, and one of them for me was always develop your expertise, because that's your gift.
Yes.
That's your gift to yourself and to the world.
Yeah. And often I listen to like, oh, Caroline, everybody says that I'm like this as a bad thing. And often I say, wait a minute, people are saying that this thing is bad, but if it highlights on you, maybe we can use it as a good thing. And that's your gift. Here, it turn it around. Weaknesses if you don't use it well, but if you use your gift as you should be using it, if you focus on that, you are in the right path. Like whatever you do, you just evolve. But if you look at your gifts as something bad, you never evolve. We focus on solving problems that are not actually problems, but they're problems being caused by like a problem that you don't even have to look at as a problem,
No, absolutely. No, well said. So at any rate, I would just say that I really do think we're all capable of raising standards, improving society, and as I said, I think we all rise and fall together. I don't think looking at our today, I guess I keep thinking about all the people talking about masks, and I'm sitting here going, really, it's about the greater good, and that's really, at the end of the day, we're better off if everybody's better off.
Yeah.
That's really, if you want to be selfish about it, then look at it that way. If you don't want to look outward and say, I want to help the world, say, okay, I want to be better off. Well, the way I'm going to be better off is by making the world better off. They're not separate. They're really not separate.
Yeah, well, yes. Hi, Joanne. I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for all the knowledge and experience that you shared today with us. Do you have any final word?
Not really, except to not denigrate business, to recognize again that it's our collective responsibility, and that capitalism isn't bad. It's how we've done it, but it's actually raised the standard of living for more people in the world than any other system has. And we only have to look at the ones that have failed. But again, I think implemented in the right spirit and in the right way, it can help improve everyone, right? So I'd say don't lose hope. I think is the biggest thing. Don't lose hope, and hold on to your values. That is very important. Hold on to your values.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Joanne.
Thank you, Karen, for asking me, and good luck to you, and good luck to all the people that are going to see this. All right?
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
See you. Gente, que incrível! A Joanne sempre me surpreende. Nossa, me conta aqui no chat o que vocês aprenderam, os ensinamentos, porque, nossa, muita coisa. Coloca aqui no chat que eu quero saber o que vocês pegaram aí dessa conversa. Uma coisa que ela comentou da consultoria, né, de modelo de negócio que a gente fez para o NDP, o Programa de Desenvolvimento da ONU, com empreendedores da Tunísia e, enfim, e de todos, ela me falou que de todos esses anos trabalhando com a UNDP, prestando consultoria de modelo de negócio para empreendedores sociais no mundo todo, ela disse que eu fui a única, a primeira, que sugeriu para ter um melhor modelo de negócio, que a gente falasse diretamente com o empreendedor e fazer uma sessão de coaching com ele, né? Que significa o quê, né? Entender o que ele quer, o que aquele empreendedor, aquela empreendedora quer por detrás daquele modelo, daquele negócio, né? Então, e foi engraçado, assim, entender que mesmo uma pessoa do outro lado do mundo, o ser humano é o mesmo, né? Então a gente monta um modelo de negócio, a gente monta um projeto de vida baseado no que a gente tem dentro da gente, né? Então se a gente não se conhece, se a gente não entende o que a gente quer colocar no mundo, acaba que o modelo de negócio vem todo deturpado, né? Então acabou que uma sessão, né, com ele, eu consegui destrinchar ali tudo e a gente fez, montou um modelo de negócio, não só o modelo de negócio, mas o projeto de vida, porque eu descobri que ele era presidente de várias associações, enfim, e como que a gente conseguiu, né, resumir todas aquelas aspirações dele em um projeto de vida só, e daí a gente conseguiu montar um modelo de negócio que realmente ele colocaria em prática, que fizesse sentido para ele. E até hoje ele me agradece, foi um momento bem especial. E daí a Joanne me convidou para ser coach, não só consultora de negócio, mas também coach nesse programa. Foi bem especial. Atenção ao todo, sim. Vamos ver aqui do Jonas. Não perder a esperança e entender quais são as nossas verdadeiras aspirações e competências. Sim, verdade. Uma outra coisa que ela falou que me chamou muita atenção foi a questão da história do Henry Ford, né? Uma coisa muito... que eu não sei se todo mundo aí conseguiu pegar ou estava aqui quando ela falou, mas o Henry Ford é muitas vezes criticado por ter criado carros em séries de uma cor monótona, só preto, mas o que as pessoas não veem é a transformação holística e sistema que foi consequência dessa produção em massa e mais barata, né? Ele possibilitou que pessoas comuns tivessem acesso ao que era até então um artigo de luxo, porque na verdade essa era a missão dele, né? Para atingir uma visão. No caso do Henry Ford, provavelmente a missão dele era através do seu talento de identificar padrões e replicá-los, possibilitar o uso de meios de transporte a todas as pessoas, independentemente de classe social, a fim de que todos sejam livres para ir e vir. E a visão dele, a fotografia de um mundo futuro, era provavelmente de um mundo com pessoas livres, que não se limitariam ao acesso a trabalho ou conhecimento, simplesmente pelo fato de estarem distantes um do outro fisicamente. O que também me lembra o que ela falou da questão do system thinking, né? De pensar holisticamente, que vem de uma visão. Você só consegue pensar holisticamente se você tiver uma visão mais zoom out, né? E enxergar tudo. Você pode pensar, e também você pode pensar em inúmeras possibilidades de futuro, mas se você não souber os seus valores de cor, a sua visão de mundo, o mundo que você quer construir e a sua missão, que é como você vai construir isso, né? Você vai continuar perdido nas inúmeras possibilidades presentes ao pensar em um sistema de forma holística. Porque, assim como ela falou, o capitalismo foi criado para incentivar a gente a resolver problemas da sociedade, o que é algo bom. Mas a maneira como ele está sendo implementado que está deturpado. Então, a gente decidiu, né, na Wake Strategy, formar líderes para saberem usar as ferramentas que caírem nas mãos delas. Pois com grandes poderes vem grandes responsabilidades, como já dizia aí o Homem-Aranha, né? Então, se Se eu te ensino blockchain, computer science, né? E todos os segredos do Google, Apple, a aplicação desse conhecimento vai depender dos seus valores, da sua intenção, do seu propósito, da sua missão, da sua visão, que mesmo que você não tenha ela clara, você tá com ela aí dentro, né? E aí, você sabe os seus valores? O seu propósito de vida? Seu propósito nos negócios? Já passou da hora de saber, né? E tudo que eu aprendi com a Joanne e todos os outros professores, empresários e colegas aqui no Vale, eu compilei em um programa que algumas pessoas têm chamado de Life University, né? Que é a Universidade da Vida, onde você não vai aprender só a lançar a sua ideia e ser bem-sucedido, mas principalmente você vai passar por um processo de autoconhecimento profundo para se entender, né? Entender que problema você quer resolver no mundo, porque tem tantos problemas, mas qual realmente que é o real chamado para eu focar? Foco é principal. Quais habilidades inatas você tem e quais outras você deve procurar em outras pessoas para compor o time? E daí sim a gente pensar em estratégias de negócio e expandir com o apoio desses feras aí que estão acompanhando aqui a gente nessa semana. E bom, por que eu criei esse programa? Eu percebi que mesmo pessoas super inteligentes e com ferramentas incríveis, eles ainda estavam confusos e voltando para a mesma vida, segundo eles, né, medíocre e infeliz. E isso eu vi até mesmo em empreendedores aplicando para o Y Combinator. Imagina, gente, a maior aceleradora do mundo aqui aqui, e perdidos, né? Focado ali naquele projeto, mas não sabendo se é realmente aquilo que eles querem realmente fazer. Louco, né? Pessoas que se formaram em Harvard, MIT, Stanford, pedindo para ir tomar um café comigo, né, pra gente conversar, porque não sabiam o que fazer da vida. Tanta ferramenta, tanto conhecimento, mas como que vai aplicar, né? E aí, como todo mundo, vem a depressão, vem a estagnação. Então, não é o conhecimento externo que vai fazer a sua vida mudar, mas sim você ter essa clareza de dentro. E tem uma tirinha do Charlie Brown que tem muito a ver com isso. Que é assim, a professora pergunta, e aí, alunos, alguma pergunta? Aí ele fala, qual é o sentido da vida, professora? Daí a professora, não, eu tô perguntando de pergunta da aula. Aí ele responde assim, mas eu realmente queria saber essa resposta antes mesmo de começar a estudar qualquer coisa. E é exatamente isso, né? Se alguém te dá um martelo, um prego, madeira, cola, mas você não sabe o que fazer com tudo isso, né? De que adianta? É perda de tempo. Então, para tudo que você está fazendo e corre para garantir a sua vaga na Nascente. E se você parar para pensar, nos principais motivos pelos quais as startups falham, também tem a ver com isso, né? Segundo o ACB Insights, quase 50% das startups falham porque criam algo que o mercado não quer. E 29% delas falham porque acaba o dinheiro investido. Vamos analisar os dados aí. E outro estudo muito importante é o realizado pelo professor de Harvard, Noam Wasserman, autor do livro, né, The Founder's Dilemma, que diz que 65% das startups falham devido a problemas entre as lideranças e que a maioria dos desafios internos das empresas provém de feridas auto-infligidas. Vamos analisar esses dados aí? Primeiro, criar algo que o mercado não quer significa que você está criando algo que você acha que o mercado quer. ou que é algo que você quer. E isso é consequência de focar na solução ao invés de focar nos problemas de uma sociedade. Focar na solução implica se apegar à solução, o que é um problema do ego, né? Ao se apaixonar pela solução, por algo, né? E apego não é sadio. Criar algo significativo significa se apaixonar por resolver um problema em busca de uma visão para cumprir uma missão. Assim, o apego deixa de existir e se torna amor, né? O amor ao problema, resolver o problema, amor às pessoas que têm aquele problema, né? Segundo, se 29% das startups falham por falta de dinheiro, elas nem deveriam ter recebido investimento a princípio. Já parou para pensar? Logo, o problema não é a falta de investimento em si, mas a falta da fonte principal de dinheiro de uma empresa, que é as vendas, né? Pessoas interessadas em comprar. O que a gente volta ao primeiro caso, né? De criar algo que vai resolver um problema de pessoas reais. E o terceiro é que é alarmante o dado de que a maioria das startups falham devido a problemas entre as lideranças, né? Comunicação e conflitos de interesses são de fato desencadeados por feridas auto-infligidas de cada um. Ou seja, né, a massiva maioria das startups falham por falhas humanas, né? Seres humanos que não conseguem se entender, que por consequência não conseguem entender o próximo e acaba criando soluções, comunicando de forma errônea, né? E então a maioria das startups falham por falhas humanas e não por causa da tecnologia errada, ou falta de dinheiro, ou falta de diploma universitário, ou uma metodologia step by step, passo a passo, que vai te levar ao sucesso. Mas sim por não se conhecerem o suficiente ao ponto de entender. Primeiro, anota aí. Qual o problema da sociedade eu quero focar meus próximos 5 anos de vida para resolver? Né? Qual público tem esse problema? Eu amo esse público? O que me faz me apegar a essa solução que já não tem funcionado? Né? O que dentro de mim me impede de pivotar? Quais são as minhas feridas auto-infligidas? Muita gente não sabe disso. Muita gente, porque acaba se tornando algo tão normal, que a gente precisa de outras pessoas, né? Um coach, para fazer a gente despertar com relação a essas feridas. E se isso parece muito para responder, não se preocupa, porque essa é uma das propostas de uma nascente, né? E o que você vai aprender nesse programa da Nascente? Você vai aprender a ter clareza do problema que você quer resolver no mundo, ter sua missão e visão definidas, traçar um plano estratégico para cumprir essa missão em direção a essa visão de mundo, né, em curto, médio e longo prazo. Você vai fazer um planejamento de um projeto que vale a pena investir os próximos 5 a 10 anos da sua carreira, porque agora você vai estar conectado com o seu propósito. E você vai aprender também as suas feridas auto-infligidas e armadilhas que te impedem de avançar e como tratá-las. Vai aprender empreendedorismo social, estratégias de modelos de negócios, estratégias de lançamento, direito para startups, como lançar a sua startup e como testar seu MVP. Dentre outras coisas, mas acho que cabe aqui falar, mas que nem eu falei, o início todo é o autoconhecimento. E esse programa é para você que quer causar impacto positivo através da carreira. É para você que perde o sono pensando em qual vai ser seu próximo passo na carreira e na vida. É para você que quer descobrir a sua missão de vida e empreendê-la. É para você que quer focar em si e entender melhor para tomar melhores decisões na vida e nos negócios. É para você que quer ter clareza de qual ideia é melhor empreender e investir, né, os próximos 5 anos nisso. E também é para você que está cansado de ver empresas sem alma e quer fundar a sua ou trazer esse espírito para dentro da sua empresa atual. Então, não perde tempo, descubra a sua missão de vida, monte sua carreira dos sonhos e impacte o mundo positivamente através de um negócio transformador. As vagas para esse programa são limitadas, então somente os primeiros que se inscreverem terão acesso ao programa, que já vai começar agora em outubro. Clica aqui no link, já vou colocar aqui. Clica no link e se inscreve. E garanta já a sua vaga com a oferta da Wake Strategy Week, né? Todo o programa por quase a metade do preço, só até hoje, meia-noite. Então corre para descobrir a sua missão, montar a sua carreira dos sonhos e impactar o mundo positivamente através de um negócio transformador, ok? Aproveita e nos vemos nesse programa. E para fechar, gente, se você gostou da aula de hoje, deixa o seu like aqui no vídeo, compartilhe esse vídeo com pessoas que você acredita que esse material vai ser transformador, e compartilhe também o que você aprendeu nas redes sociais com a hashtag Awake Strategy Week. Se inscreve aqui no canal, ativa o sininho, porque a gente vai continuar mantendo aqui ativo. E garanta já a sua vaga na Nascente, vai ser uma jornada e tanto, e nos vemos lá.